Have you ever wondered where an AI's values actually come from? Like when it outright refuses to answer a question, who really made that decision? Or, here's a big one, does it actually remember what you said yesterday? Look, most of us picture generative AI as the single mystical entity, right? Like a magic brain in a box, sitting on a server farm somewhere, just constantly thinking, learning, and updating itself every time it talks to us. But I'm here to tell you, that picture, it's a complete illusion. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to completely shatter those misconceptions by taking a close look at the actual mechanical reality of how these models are built and deployed. Well, the magic instantly disappears. We're going to demystify the entire AI pipeline by breaking it down into 3 totally distinct timescales: months, weeks, and seconds. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll tackle the single brain myth. Then we'll walk through the model's journey, months of building raw capability, weeks of shaping the assistant, and seconds of frozen inference. Finally, we'll uncover exactly where alignment lives and how your everyday interactions actually close the feedback loop.
All right, part 1, the single brain myth. We are breaking the illusion of the thinking box.
So you're sitting at your keyboard, you type a prompt, the AI answers, and you naturally wonder, wait, does this thing learn from talking to me? If you correct it mid-conversation, is it getting smarter right there on the spot? When it references a joke you made 5 minutes ago, is that because its digital brain just formed a new memory? It is incredibly easy to assume the answer is yes, simply because, well, that's exactly how human conversation works. But here's the thing. The myth is that you're talking to a single thinking entity that's constantly updating its brain. The reality? It is literally a manufacturing pipeline. And the most absolutely crucial point to understand here is that the deployed model you interact with is completely frozen. It does not learn, it doesn't update its internal weights from your chat. Any continuity you're experiencing, that's just the interface taking your previous text and quietly feeding it right back into the system.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need to map out the system. The whole process runs across 3 very different timescales. You've got months spent on pre-training, weeks spent on post-training, and seconds on inference. Honestly, almost every single misconception people have about AI is simply a timescale confusion. It's basically attributing a behavior to one stage when it actually happened in a completely different one.
Okay, let's jump into the first timescale, months, building raw capability. This is the foundation of fluency.
This pre-training phase takes months, and it happens exactly once. It is enormously expensive, yet the main objective is almost comically simple. Just predict the next token at a truly enormous scale. The system is fed trillions of tokens of text. It looks at a sequence, guesses the next piece, gets corrected, and repeats this process across hundreds of billions of parameters. And here's the kicker. At this stage, there is absolutely no concept of truth or helpfulness or refusing a bad prompt. It is purely learning the structure and the facts of human language.
The contrast here is actually super fascinating. What emerges from all those months of pre-training is what we call a base model. Now, it is incredibly fluent, but it has 0 manners. Literally none. If you ask it, what is the capital of France, it might answer Paris. Or it might just generate 3 more trivia questions, because it's just predicting plausible next text. The usable assistant, the polite one that actually follows your instructions, stops talking when it should, and answers your questions, that requires a completely different stage of development.
Which brings us to our next phase, weeks, shaping the assistant. This is where behavior is actually decided.
Now, this phase only takes a matter of weeks, but it has the absolute highest leverage on the model's final personality. It happens in 4 specific steps. First up, you have the model spec, or the constitution. This is a literal written document outlining exactly how to be helpful and when to decline a request. Next is instruction tuning. This is where we show the model curated examples so it actually learns to respond to us rather than just continuing a block of text. Third, we bring in a reward model. Think of this as an entirely separate AI that acts as a judge. And finally, reinforcement learning. The model answers, the judge scores it, and the internal weights get nudged toward higher scores, millions of times over. The wild takeaway here? When you find yourself arguing with an AI's judgment, you're ultimately just arguing with a written constitution that's been pressed into its network.
Let's move to the final timescale, seconds, the frozen inference. This is about assembling your answer in real time. Remember those frozen weights we talked about earlier? The model that answers your 1000th message is byte for byte identical to the one that answered your very first. So what exactly is happening in those few seconds before it replies? Well, the system gathers pieces into a very strict hierarchy of trust. Right at the top, you have the system prompt. These are hidden rules set by the operator, high trust. Below that is your user prompt, which is untrusted and cannot outrank the system rules. And finally, at the bottom, retrieve documents, like random web pages. This setup brilliantly illustrates how security vulnerabilities happen. Because retrieved documents enter this exact same context window, hostile text hidden inside a web page can literally try to hijack the model. That's the exact mechanism behind prompt injection attacks. It's basically smuggling bad instructions through the one door that isn't you typing. So, after all that context is assembled, the model just does what it was trained to do: predict the next token. Except now, it's steered by all that behavioral training. But there is one final check. The draft response passes through an independent output classifier. Think of this as the last wall before our response streams to your screen. It can actually catch something the model produced and completely replace it with a canned refusal if it violates the safety guidelines.
Next up, where alignment actually lives. Who really controls the AI?
This breakdown gives us an incredibly powerful mental model. There are really only 3 touch points where an AI's values are actually set. First, the constitution. That's deep, it's slow to change, and it's controlled entirely by the vendor. Second, the system prompt. That one is shallow, fast, and controlled by the app operator. Third, the output classifier. This is a blunt, final filter, and it's also controlled by the operator. So if you face a refusal, it is absolutely coming from one of these 3 places. And this perfectly highlights the massive value of local first AI. Because if you run open weights on your own hardware, sure, you can't change the vendor's constitution, but you take total control over the system prompt and the output classifier. You literally govern 2 of the 3 touch points yourself.
Finally, let's talk about closing the feedback loop, how your keyboard actually changes the future.
Now, I mentioned earlier that the deployed model is completely frozen, right? But here is the one and only way your keyboard actually changes the future. Every single thumbs up, every thumbs down, and every triggered refusal creates a data point. It doesn't patch the live model you're talking to, remember, frozen. Instead, those signals accumulate into massive sets of preference data. That data then feeds the reward model for the next round of post-training on the next version of the AI.
The author of our source material sums this up beautifully, saying, "The pipeline isn't a line, it's a loop. Inference itself changes nothing, and yet, in aggregate, it quietly shapes what the next model will become. It's like a giant puzzle. The residue of all our daily answers, our ratings, and our refusals flows right back to the beginning to become the raw material for the next turn of the wheel. It operates on the scale of entire model releases, not your individual conversations."
Once you stop mystifying the AI and start seeing it for what it is, a mechanical system operating across months, weeks, and seconds, everything just makes so much more sense. But I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on. If you rely on rented APIs where you absolutely cannot touch the Constitution, whose values are you actually arguing with? When the tools you use every single day are governed by deep, baked-in rules you can never see or change, who is really in control? Just something to think about the next time you're staring at a generative text box. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.